Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the cryptoverse. This is NFA Live. Here we are again with Rob from Digital Asset News. How's it going, Rob?
It's going pretty good. Week after the conference.
Week after the conference, and we have Guy from Coin Bureau. How are you doing?
I'm good. I don't have that week after the conference feeling that you guys do, so I may be a little less euphoric.
The post-conference hangover.
Maybe I'll be a little more high energy.
Nah.
Yeah, no, I mean, so we will talk a little bit about the conference. But guys, if you're not subscribed to either Rob or Guy, link for their channels are in the description below. So make sure you guys go check that out. Rob, he has the Digital Asset News, and for Guy, we do the NFA Live on his second channel called Coin Bureau Clips. So make sure you guys subscribe to both those places because we rotate where we do this show. So we're going to go through a few different questions, just kind of get everyone's opinion on things. I'd like to start off with the with the Bitcoin Nashville conference because I know I was there, Rob was there, Guy was not there. However, I'm sure you at least saw some of the announcements that were coming out of that conference. So, Rob, I'll start with you first, since you were there. What's your thought about the strategic Bitcoin reserve announcement? For those who are unaware, basically, there was actually a couple things, but Trump came out and said that they would basically use the Bitcoin that they have in any future Bitcoin collected. They just basically have a reserve. And then some other people came out and said some other things that were a lot more optimistic. But I'll start with you, Rob. What are your thoughts on that? And also, Trump also said that if he were elected, he would fire Gary Gensler, and there was a huge round of applause. So I'm kind of curious on your thoughts about both those things.
Yeah, so it was one of those things where I was excited. I think everybody was excited about RFK Jr. and Trump being there, and of course Kamala Harris was supposed to be there but couldn't make it, and everybody was excited about it. And I think I've talked about this on my show. I think everybody's talked about it, but if you weren't there, it was hard to kind of gauge what was going on. And when RFK Jr. had his speech, it just knocked out of the park. And I thought to myself, man, if one of the other politicians could come here and kind of beat that, it'd be pretty amazing. And they couldn't. And when Trump came up, and first of all, let me just say this. I understand why people love these shows and like these shows, because we don't talk about politics, because they get bombarded with politics all day long. I get it. So I'll just say that for that piece, I can see why people weren't too excited about Trump's speech, and they were more excited about RFK's speech, and even Senator Lummis from Wyoming and a couple others that were there. And it was a step in the right direction. And I'll just say this to take the politics out of it. When I got in 2017, there was no senators or congressmen talking about Bitcoin, crypto, and digital assets. I think the biggest thing we had was John McAfee coming out of nowhere going, 1 million Bitcoins going to 1 million. That was like the height of everything. And that was 2017. And then, of course, we had our big dips, and there was futures contracts were started, and everybody shorted the hell out of it. And then, of course, we crashed 2018. Then going to 2020, 2021, and we had President Bukele from El Salvador. He said, I'm going to make this legal tender, and everybody was excited. We finally had Michael Saylor from MicroStrategy buy it and actually put it on the books for a private company. Everybody was great. And, of course, we had a big downfall. And now it seems like it's like that meme, like how things started, how things are going. We just had, I don't care the message, we just had 2 presidential candidates come to a Bitcoin conference and talk to us. Whether you think it was pandering or not, it was still awesome for them to be there. So what do you think is going to happen in the next 4 years? I don't know what's going to happen, but I think we're in the right place at the right time. And lastly, I'll just say this. It wasn't so much about the candidates that were there. To me, it was about meeting the people that actually came up. I got to meet Ben for the first time, which was pretty amazing. We've been working together for like 3 years now. And I think that was the best part about what's going on. And then lastly, I will say this. I talked to a couple of people that were at the Bitcoin conference last year. Ben, maybe you can corroborate this. they said that, the energy last year wasn't near as much. Vendor spacing was about 40% of what it was right then, or for this one. Everybody was there, everybody was packed in, everybody had high energy. So I just kind of think we're gonna carry that into the next session of whatever happens in 2020 and in 2024, 2025. That's what I saw. That's what I like about it.
Yeah, there was definitely more energy in 2024. I mean, it's basically just a reflection of price, right? As price is high, people are more energetic, and maybe they're more likely to afford to even be able to be there.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, Ben. The only thing we were missing is Guy coming in and doing an NFA show live from the villa.
We'll write that off as a key missed opportunity. Yeah. No, I mean, it was, yeah, Guy, what's your thoughts on the fact that there were two presidential candidates at the conference? I mean, yeah, we know that there's a strong likelihood that there's some element of like, just trying to get votes, but at the same time, 4 years ago, I don't think any of us thought there'd be presidential candidates coming to the Bitcoin conference anytime soon. So that's at least a step in the right direction. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on what you heard from the conference in general.
Yeah. Well, yeah, obviously I was kind of ingesting all the news of the conference from a distance of several thousand miles, and so I was getting everything kind of the next day, as it were. But even from here, you could sense that there was a really good vibe about the event, just sort of following what was going on Twitter, looking at the sort of sentiment of people posting from there. And it did feel, even at this remove, it did feel like a totally different vibe to what I sort of felt from last year's one. I wasn't there last year either. The last one I went to was in 2022. But I remember last year's conference, and it just seemed to be a bit down. It seemed to be the sentiment was not good, and it was kind of low energy. And then I went to Token 2049 in Singapore. That was about coming up on a year ago now, and I remember feeling a real energy from that, and that was really interesting. Comparing what was happening and in the West compared to the East, and there did seem to be sort of more bullishness on the Asian side of things. However, this time around, it seems that the conference has really, the Bitcoin conference really kind of got its mojo back. People were in a much better frame of mind, and obviously that is because, as you say, of price. A lot has happened in that year, and of course, because there were two presidential candidates there, and from what I understand, it was fairly close to being three. I think Kamala Harris was sort of, she was in talks to attend, and I was listening to a podcast, a sort of UK based podcast that talks about US politics, and the hosts there were sort of they kind of saw it as a little bit of a missed opportunity on Kamala Harris's part. So I think even last year it probably would have been a bit of a stretch to imagine, maybe not RFK Jr., but certainly Donald Trump there, and it would be a real stretch to imagine that crypto is now the political issue that it is. And I'm with you, Rob. That's not 100% a good thing, and I think we should be very wary about cheering too hard for crypto being becoming a political issue, because I think there are dangers in that as well. But it does point the way towards a fair, if you like, a fairer shake in Congress, to quote the name of the pack that they've got. And I think it just points to the fact that we will get some sort of sensible regulations in the US before very long, and that can only be a good thing.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious, Guy, what is your thought process on Bitcoin potentially coming up as a debate topic at a future debate? Because you make a good point. I mean, two of the candidates were there. One of them was not, even though it seemed like Kamala Harris at one point, I mean, at least the Twitter headlines, which who knows, right? But at least the Twitter headlines at once upon a time were saying that she was going to go. But I mean, with the crypto vote, and we actually talked about this like a year ago, I think, sort of the crypto vote. But with the crypto vote definitely appealing to more and more people. Do you think that Bitcoin might be a debate topic at a future presidential debate?
I think there's a chance it could be. I think it would probably be more in Trump's interest to bring that up, because he's sort of, at this stage, he's kind of got the head start on that. He's come out, he's in favor of crypto. I guess there are ways that in which he can attack Kamala Harris on that, and the Biden administration sort of more generally, which, let's face it, has been nothing but hostile to crypto. So that could be a good line of attack for Trump and the Republicans. The thing is, though, like, I do sort of wonder, what's the vibe? Here we are in the crypto bubble. What is the vibe outside of the bubble? Just how big a deal is crypto really? And I mean really, because, like, is it 40 to 50 million Americans hold crypto? That's, I've heard those figures bandied around. Now, that is impressive, but if you hold $50, $100 worth of Bitcoin, if you hold $100 worth of XRP that you paid $300 for back in the day, like, do you care? Do you care as much about that as you do about all the other issues that there are, that the US has got at the moment? I don't want to run through them all, because I think that's probably straying into political territory. But let's just say, I think crypto is probably pretty niche for the vast majority of people. And I think there are probably bigger issues to be discussed. So I think it could come up. Like I say, I think it might be in Trump's interest to bring it up, but I'm not sure yet if it's enough of an issue for enough Americans, and of course, enough Americans in swing states that are going to decide this. And that is actually a very small fraction of people. And I know the Blockchain Association were citing some data that said crypto was an issue for sort of 1 in 5 voters in swing states, which is good. That also means it's not an issue for 4 in 5 voters in swing states. So how do you want to read that? Does that make it a big deal or not? I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, I just don't think, maybe we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, and outside of the bubble, actually,
in crypto we never get ahead of
ourselves. Us crypto bros getting ahead of ourselves? No. What are you talking about? Nonsense.
Actually,
yeah, that's I don't know. I think it just feels like we're in the bubble big time.
I think a couple things. First of all, we know the social interest, right? We see that it's still pretty low. So maybe there is some element of sort of a sobering reality that you just said, of like, yeah, like, we care, but that's also because we never left. How do you get the people that left to actually come back? And new all-time highs didn't bring them. So we'll see. Rob, kind of you have the similar view as Guy on that, or different one?
Just a little different. And Guy's right, because you have to ask yourself, like, how big of a deal is this really? And I think and if you're looking at swing states, I mean, the margin to victory is pretty much razor thin, depending on where you're actually at. So it's just like in marketing. Like, if you can get a segment, if you can win over 10%, 15%, then you want to do that. So, like, let's say for marketing, you're like, some people like this specific product, and the reason they like it is because of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different reasons. You try to line up those reasons as much as possible, pander to those people, get those people, bring them in, and that's it. So, I mean, it's true. The guy's right. It depends on how much there actually is. But you can see some of the shifts that are going on in Congress right now. I believe there was a group of Democrats that put an open letter and said, hey, we need to actually stop this essential attacks on crypto and stop this anti-crypto army. And it was pretty much directed towards Elizabeth Warren. And I think as time goes on, you're going to see more of that shift, but it's going to take more time. So is it going to be that big of a deal this time around? I'm not 100% sure how big it's going to be, but it is a factor. And I think it's a factor enough for Trump to come in, RFK to come in, and their pollsters said, we should probably make this some type of a priority, even whatever it is. And now we'll see how it all plays out with the VP, who is now the presidential candidate.
Fair enough. Yeah, I mean, I guess it'll be a bigger deal, a bigger deal each cycle, right? But it's easy to get ahead of ourselves. One
It
thing I'm
is.
curious. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm going to say it is. I mean, we get ahead of ourselves. That's what we do.
Yeah, so I'm kind of curious about your guys' thoughts on Ethereum. I'd like to just kind of, because one thing we saw after the launch of the spot Bitcoin ETF was the sort of the outflows from Grayscale GBTC, and it actually led to some downward price action on Bitcoin, at least for a couple of weeks. I'm curious, do you think something like that is going on now for sort of the equivalent, the ETHE? Is that, is that behind, or is that at least partially behind this recent weakness on, say, like the ETH Bitcoin valuation? Because we bounced out of the 0.04 levels back above 0.05, and now we're right back below 0.05 again. So I'm curious about your thoughts on that. And I also noticed that the supply of Ethereum is still is starting to go back up, and it has been essentially since like March or April. So kind of curious, just in general, what your thought process is on Ethereum here. Could it be following the blueprint that Bitcoin laid out when its spot ETF was launched, or do you think we're going to get something a little bit different, Rob?
Well, let me share my screen, because it's a nuanced point in question. So if we take a look back in the early days of, remember in January, actually remember in December, when we heard about this ETF and people were like, oh, this might happen, it's going to be great, it's going to be the greatest thing of all time. And it was, and it is. And you can see this is from Hey Apollo. You can just see the inflows for Bitcoin starting on January 10th. And it was, and as you can see right here, it's all positive. Inflows, 16.3, 21.9, 19.9, and it went up. But even though there was positive inflows from January 10th, and then of course it started to really take off around February or so, if we take a look over here for price action, we can see that, yeah, January 10th, we went from 46,000 and we dropped here. But remember, this is all positive inflows for the ETF, right? And it took about a month or so, back to February 11th, to kind of hit that same level. And if you take a look over here for the Ethereum ETF, what do you'll notice? You'll notice that as far as the total flows, I mean, besides 30th of July, some miracle, thankfully to BlackRock and their ETH, only one day has been a positive, and then it just went back to negative because of Grayscale and what they're actually dumping. So we see negative flows, we see negative price action, and then some people will have enlightened me, thank you, everybody, which is, I always say, well, people are saying that people are going to sell because they want to get out of Ethereum, out of Grayscale, because it was a 2.5% fee. Now they're going to go to the 0.15% fee. And I said, well, that's not really what it looks like. But they remind me that, Rob, you got to remember, there's a 30-day rule, a wash rule, and it depends. So if you're in profits, there is some leeway. But if you're trying to take this type of as far as like a wash rule and use the negative revenue on your taxes, you can't just jump right back within 30 days. And then every single ETF, they have their own specific rules. So you can take a look at this and say, well, maybe they're just getting out, waiting the 30 days and then jumping right back in. And lastly, I'll just say is what a genius move. Because if everybody in Grayscale knew what they did last time with Bitcoin, they go, we're just going to dump it. And that means that the price is going to go down. So I'm going to take my profits and then I get to get back in 30 days. And then I'm going to have to get it at a lower cost. This is beautiful. So I see this just as like a very small amount of time, and we'll, bounce back later.
All right, Guy, what's your thought process here on the is it just a similar thing that we saw back with Bitcoin? Do you agree with generally what Rob was saying?
Generally, yeah. The dynamic, the same dynamic is playing out again. Outflows from the Grayscale product, which is a load of crap, and people wanting to, you know, to reallocate to these other ETFs. From what I've seen, the actual bleed out from ETH, from Grayscale's Ethereum product, has been faster than the bleed out from GBTC was, which I don't think is a bad thing. I think, you know, people are getting on. People know the drill this time round. As Rob said, they get out of Grayscale, and then obviously the 30-day rule applies, and then they can get back in. So I think the sooner ETH empties out, and, you know, we can park that, and the sooner that capital can be applied to, you know, all the other ETF products from BlackRock, Fidelity, et cetera, the better, really. And then we can move on. And I think the market will move on. I think it will be positive for ETH in the long term. And actually, if you take Grayscale out of the equation, the spot Ethereum ETFs, they have actually been more successful relative to market cap so far than the spot Bitcoin ones were. So I'm bullish for these in the sort of medium to long term. I think we just need to get the Grayscale selling over and done with, and you know, and then I think the inflows to the other ones will really pick up, and the whole thing will become positive. That will improve sentiment around ETH, which I think will attract more inflows. And I guess then the only issue that Ethereum and these Ethereum ETFs have is, I think we've discussed it before, is the fact that there isn't quite such a ready, easily digestible narrative for ETH like there is for Bitcoin. Bitcoin, digital gold, easy peasy, you know, take my money, as it were. Ethereum is a little bit more complicated to explain to investors. Therefore, I think it may be a bit of a harder sell. But I don't think these you know, kind of net outflows that we've seen are anything particularly concerning. And I think the quicker the better. The quicker everyone gets out of Grayscale, sooner we can move on.
Yeah, it seems reasonable. We had a pretty big day yesterday. We had FOMC. Rob's favorite topic.
It is. I love this part.
Yeah, I'll go to you, Guy, on this one. Unless Rob wants to chime in.
Nope. This is all Guy.
Yeah, well, I mean, so the Fed held rates at 5.5%, which seemed like the most likely outcome. I mean, it was sort of advertised well in advance. And I think in the last like 10 to 15 years, there's only really been 2 times that the Fed really went against the market, or, you know, what they kind of laid out already. And one of those times was right after the Lehman Brothers collapsed. And I think people thought they were going to lower rates. I don't think they did, but then they did, like, just a few weeks later, inter-meetings. They ended up doing it between meetings. So yeah, it seems like, and I think the other time was also around a bank. I think it was back in March of 2023. I think there was kind of an expectation that maybe they wouldn't hike because of the bank collapse, and then they hiked again. So it does seem like the only 2 times where they really went against what the market was suggesting was around bank collapses. So I mean, like, the market basically said, "Hey, we're not gonna, you know, the Fed's not gonna cut rates," and once again, the market was right. But Powell was pretty dovish, I think, in his last talk. He referenced potentially cutting in September several times. And if you look at the CME group, I mean, they're basically pricing in a 0% chance that they don't cut, right? I mean, they're basically saying that they will cut at the next meeting. So I'm curious, do you agree with those probabilities? I mean, do you think that the Fed will cut in September? Like, is it time to finally get that first rate cut? We've already seen, I believe, the Bank of Canada cut rates. I think I saw the Bank of England cut rates as well. So do you think for the United States, for the Fed, the time has come by September, Guy? Or, you know, is there, well, I guess another question sort of on top of that, do you think they'll cut by September? But what is the biggest risk to the sort of the cutting by September narrative?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. The Bank of England has just cut rates today for the first time in a long time. And I think there is these central banks all talk to each other. Obviously, there's the Jackson Hole symposium next month, isn't it? That's when they get together and talk policy and things like that. So I think that will be very interesting. But that's a little bit of a tangent. Anyhow, I think, Jerome has been pretty straightforward. He said what he's going to do, and he's done it so far. And Ben, I like the tweet that you put out yesterday or the day before, basically saying, well, Powell has done a pretty good job. He's okay. He was a little late to the whole inflation thing, but they've hiked rates, they've kept them high. Inflation is declining. At least the official figures say that it is, and the economy hasn't crashed. Quite the opposite. And as you said in that tweet, Powell has access to a lot more data than armchair experts like us do. So he's done what he said he was going to do, and now I think I don't think he's playing any sort of 3D chess around this. I think if he's making noises about cutting rates, then that is most likely what he will do, assuming, of course, that the data continues to come in in favor of that. I guess, I was talking about this with a few of the guys here earlier today, just, the sort of Fed meeting in general. And one interesting viewpoint, I think Dan was saying this, having watched Jerome's speech after, with the announcement. He said that he sounded like he was fairly concerned about employment. And I guess this kind of leads, I guess the only real danger then to the rate cutting narrative is that obviously rate cuts are associated with times of economic stress. The Fed historically cuts rate, as you pointed out, Ben, historically cuts rates in response to a crisis of some kind. So I guess there is perhaps that possibility that it kind of works the other way. The Fed cuts rates, and the economy, so the markets kind of panic, because they see that as a signal that, oh, well, the Fed has access to all this data. What is the Fed? The Fed must be cutting rates because something's broken. So I wonder if it could sort of paradoxically turn out to spook the markets more than pump them. But because as you say, the Fed has the Fed sees a lot more, you would imagine, than the rest of us do, and therefore the sense could be, well, the Fed must see something coming over the hill that it doesn't like.
It's a fair point, because in Q2, real GDP was 2.8%, I believe. Inflation is still 3%. So if the economy is so strong, why cut? That might be the sort of the counter argument. Like if everything's working. I think the reason is because there is some weakness in the labor market, right? New hires, they're down to levels well below pre-pandemic highs. Like they're down to basically back where they were in 2017. Very similar thing with quits. So I think there is some weakness, but initial claims are still relatively low. But I think this morning we just got a higher print than we've seen in a little while. I think in the high 240s, I believe. But yeah, I think you're right. I think the question is, will they be able to engineer a soft landing? That's obviously what everyone wants. That's the narrative. And I guess the argument is, well, will a 25 basis point rate cut do anything, to change the trend, or do you need a 200 basis point rate cut? But again, the S&P 500 put in new all-time highs last month, so it's not like there's really been that much pain in the markets at this point. Now, obviously in crypto, we haven't seen a new all-time high since March, so it has been a little while longer. But I'm curious though, and maybe Guy, I'll start with you on this one. Smaller cap stocks like the Russell 2000, they've been doing kind of pretty well over the last few weeks, especially relative to the larger market cap stuff. Like, you look at the Russell against Nvidia, or just the Russell against the NASDAQ, you can see that the Russell has been outperforming the sort of the blue chips, if you will. And arguably the reason for that is the expectation of rate cuts, right? I've heard a lot of people talk about how like a lot of small businesses, they really just need to see the end of the tunnel. They need rate cuts. I'm curious though, I mean, do you think that'll continue? But also, do you think we'll see a similar move in the crypto space? Because, while Bitcoin is, still near the highs, right? It's still near the highs. A lot of alts are actually, I was looking at this earlier, a lot of altcoins are down 50 to 70% from where they were in March. And, that is something that you can see that the cryptoverse has been playing out in a slightly different way. I mean, just to give you a few examples, right? Just a few examples. Polkadot in March was $12. Now it's $5. Cardano in March was 80 cents. Now it's 39 cents. Avalanche was $64. Now it's $25. Matic was $1.30. Now it's 49 cents, right? So you can see how, and even the DGen favorite, right? Dogecoin was 23 cents and now it's 12 cents. So you can see that, yeah, Bitcoin is still doing its thing, right? It's still in the 60 to 70K range, which is essentially where it's been, for most of the year. But you're not really seeing that same strength in some of the alts. Now there are a few that have done really well. But I'm curious, do you think that rate cuts will lead to alts showing some relative strength against Bitcoin in the coming months? Or yeah, what are your thoughts on that, Rob?
Oh, well, if I take a look at it with rate cuts coming in, I mean, I think that's what it's going to be like is with this. Rate cuts are going to come in and they're going to see, well, okay, now the rate cuts come in and people say, oh, well, now the rates are down. This might be a great time to start to buy up housing because the actual rates, the mortgage rates are actually dropped. So we're going to actually put more into housing. Housing comes in and the demand goes down because the amount of housing goes down. And then all of a sudden they say, well, okay, now that we have this going on, maybe we should start to, at some point, fire up the printers or do some type of quantitative easing. And they start to get money into the system and then it'll go for more liquidity. So can I say that right now that because of the rate cuts, immediately we're going to see altcoins go up? I don't think that's how it works. I've said this before and I'll say it again. I don't think we're going to see too much of a monster rally before we get out of this presidential election and the markets figure out, okay, this is who the president is. This is where we're going to go. This is what the policy is going to be, and we can move forward. But it is interesting to note, and I think this was one of the things I think we mentioned this, Ben, before, the NASDAQ. And you can see that there's different stocks, large cap stocks, and people are getting out of those and going to smaller caps. It's the same thing that we would see like right now in our crypto market. So we can see that people get out of large caps going into smaller caps, but that doesn't happen right now. If you take a look at the top 20, just like what you said, there's been a lot of bleeding. Now, of course, you can make the case for, well, what about Solana? Well, what about Toncoin? Well, what about Near? Because if you take a look at, over a longer horizon, yes, those have outperformed Bitcoin, but that's not what we're looking at. We're looking at since March. So to me, what I take a look at is like, if the rates start to cut, great. That means that hopefully at some point, the money that I put in since 2022, 2023, and now in alts is going to pay off at some point. But as far as like it's going to happen anytime soon, I just don't see that happening, especially until 2025.
The post-halving year is normally more favorable for alts than Bitcoin, so we'll see if that happens again. Guys, by the way, if you have any questions for Guy or Rob, post them in the chat below so that we can go through some of those. I will check in though with Guy. I mean, Guy, are you on the same page here with sort of looking at rate cuts as potentially leading to, some relative strength in certain parts of the altcoin market? Again, I don't think anyone's saying that every altcoin is going to, to do very, very well, but do you think, and I'm talking about relative to Bitcoin, right? Relative to Bitcoin. Because I mean, even Guy pointed out earlier, right? I mean, you know, sometimes you get rate cutting cycles where it's not a good thing. And there are times though in the past where the Fed has cut rates and it was not in response to like an emergency or something, and then the market was fine. But yeah, there is always that risk of, well, if they're cutting rates because they're seeing something bad in the data, then that's where it becomes an issue. But do you think those rate cuts will sort of usher in a period where people are willing to take on a little bit more risk? Because I mean, even Rob, I think it was Rob, or I don't know who said it, but one of you guys said that basically, like, what's the narrative for Ethereum, right? Like relative to Bitcoin. The Bitcoin narrative has been there for a long time, but what's that narrative going to be? And so I'm curious, like, do you think those rate cuts could usher in sort of a different narrative in 2025?
Yeah, I think in 2025 is the answer, because I think, crypto is so good. The crypto market, if there's one thing it's really good at, it's pricing things in. And so I imagine that now, there's a fairly broad consensus among crypto market participants that the Fed will cut by September, most likely. So, I think will help with an overall improvement in sentiment. I think it will help with a general sort of perhaps more favorable attitude among the sort of wider markets towards risk on assets. But I think it's going to take a long time, and it's probably going to take more than one rate cut, because I think, as Rob pointed out, one rate cut ain't gonna cut it. Really, it's not going to make a huge amount of difference to people's everyday lives. So when it comes to the altcoin market, I think actually, so a rate cut will help. It will certainly, I think, put things in motion, perhaps. But I think perhaps the biggest threat to altcoins, or the biggest hurdle to the altcoin market for the rest of this year, could actually be those spot ETFs for BTC and ETH, because they are at the moment a very easy way for the vast majority of overall market participants, certainly in the US market. And of course, there are ETFs in other markets as well, spot ETFs for Bitcoin and Ethereum and other markets. These are the easy way for many people to get into crypto. So will they hoover up? Let's say a rate cut comes and we're in a more risk-on environment. Great. But are those spot ETFs going to hoover up that excess liquidity that has been earmarked for crypto by these people? And will any of that be recycled? Will any of that rotate into altcoins? Now, rotating from these spot ETFs into altcoins isn't straightforward, because for a lot of people that would mean opening a Coinbase account or whatever, going into crypto. And one of the reasons the ETFs have been so successful is because they make it easy for people to get exposure without having to do all of the crypto stuff. So I think in short, we're going to need more of a catalyst for retail to get involved in the crypto market, for people to start downloading Coinbase again and go searching for things that are way more exotic than Bitcoin and Ethereum. Now that could very well be the November election. That could very well be. I think it was meant. Obviously, Trump said in his speech, this is assuming Trump gets in, but said he would fire Gary Gensler. And I mean, if one thing unites the crypto community, it's that Gary Gensler must go. But if that were to happen, then it's not. I don't think it's actually that straightforward. It's just him coming in and going, Gary, time's up. I think you can't just actually fire him. There has to be actual grounds for it. And then another question that I wanted to ask you guys as well is that if Trump were to win, what would be Powell's position? Because Trump, I think, has been critical of Powell in the past. So might he,
Sorry,
go ahead. Ben. No, that was it. I was curious to know what Powell's position would be.
I know Trump has been critical of Powell, but in a recent interview, I think Trump did say he would let Powell finish his term, which I think goes out until 2026, I believe.
Okay.
So I honestly, at this point, I think Powell has done a pretty good job. Like, honestly, I feel like he has. I feel like had he listened to his critics back in 2022 and he had cut rates back then when everyone was screaming to cut rates, and you can't go you can't take them to 5.5%. Who knows where we would be? We could have already had a second wave of inflation at this point. Now he's on the other side of it, right? Now I think the issue is like, the labor market is showing a little bit of weakness. But, if you look at 1972, inflation went back to 3% in the summer, and it was an election year. And this was after a spike a couple years before. And then in the post-election year, it just went right back up, So I think Powell, he knows the risks. He's got to be careful. And the issue I think for Powell is that if he cuts too soon, the people that are blaming him now for not cutting, if he cuts too soon, then they'll blame him for cutting too soon, and they'll blame him for another round of inflation. If he cuts too late and we get a recession, then they'll be like, oh, see, I told you should have cut. But those are the same people that told him to cut in 2022. So he's kind of in one of those tough positions where no matter really what he does, there's going to be criticism. I would like to see him stay just because I think it makes sense. He's been here for this entire business cycle, essentially. And let's see him get the job done. I mean, I would say I have more confidence in him getting the job done than them getting rid of him and then bringing in someone new. I think if they do something like that, it's more likely to lead to something like the 1970s, where you get someone new in, they just slash rates immediately because of political pressure, and then we deal with it again in 2026. So those are my views. But the last I saw, he was going to let him finish his term. I don't know if Rob has heard different.
No, I mean, no, he hasn't said anything about it. I think that's not one of his things that he's thinking about. And I will just say that 2 weeks ago it was Ben, it was me and you and Guy. We had Dan, your head of research, on, and we did the show. And one of the things that we talked about was, if he does cut rates, I said it would be because of the politics to show strength for the incumbent. And I said that's the only way that I could see it, because I don't see there's any data that would approve that. And of course, I remember Dan said, well, I think he's gonna cut the end of this month. I was like, well, Dan, we'll see what happens. But here we are, and they didn't. It's just one of those things where, like, if you just we take a look at the stats, the FOMC meeting, and all the information that comes in. I look at him like the only way he would do that, or why he would do that, is for political reasons. So I have to tip my hat to him for not caving into the pressure, because I'm sure he got it on that side.
I think one other thing we should probably think about, the market should actually think about, is not whether they cut in September, but it's how many rate cuts do you get this year, right? Because that's the thing I think that a lot of people are taking for granted. I think everyone's assuming that once they start to cut, they'll cut at every meeting. If you look at the probabilities, right, on CME Group, you can see that the market's essentially expecting them to start cutting every meeting. There is a bit of nuance to that. I think you could argue that it's like a bimodal distribution between people that think they're not going to cut and then people that think they're going to cut very aggressively. And when you combine those probabilities together, you just get something that looks like they get one cut a month. But that might be the bigger question, because, if you guys remember, when they stopped hiking, they hiked and then they paused and then they hiked again, right? Mm-hmm. So what happens, one potential scenario is they cut in September after all Bitcoin pairs break down in August. I'm just saying, is possible they cut in September and then maybe they don't cut the following month, which might be a surprise. But I don't know. We'll see, because the following one will actually be November 7th, I believe, which I don't, when do you guys know when the election, like specifically what day it is?
The election itself, first Tuesday of every November.
But like the date of that. Yeah.
Oh, it's November 5th, 6th.
I've got the 9th in my head, but that's, I could be wrong. I probably am.
Okay. It looks like it's November 5th. So, and the next FOMC, or the one after September, is November 7th. So it'll be just after the election. So I guess they could theoretically cut in November and it'd be after the election. But yeah, that'd be another risk, I think, is like, what's the actual path of rate cuts? Not just when do we get the first one.
Yeah. Because I mean, like we said, we certainly need more than one. One is just a first step on a very long path.
right?
Yeah.
Unless the first one's 200 basis points.
Yeah.
That's not happening, man. See, this is why I watch your guys' channel for the FOMC stuff and Tom Crown. If I can get that information from 3 good sources, I'm good to go.
No, Tom Crown was in the chat earlier. I don't know if you guys saw him.
Got me, Tom.
All right, we got some questions for you guys. So
before we do questions, I got a question for you. I just have this. Everybody's been asking me this question about this picture from the party. I don't know the relevance to this, but yes, this was a mannequin in the party. Like, well, here's me and Ben. Oh, it doesn't show it, but yeah, this is the top on the first floor. There's this mannequin just floating around the pool. I'm like, I don't know why that was, but it was something. So Ben, please enlighten us.
So I didn't know that was going to be there. There was also a cardboard desk. I don't know if you saw that.
No.
And
Where was that?
It was on the first floor, and there was a cake that was a chessboard. But a lot of people didn't know the chessboard was a cake, and so they kept trying to move the pawns, but the pawns were like chocolate. But yeah, so I didn't know that was going to be there. Dana, she put it there, and I guess the idea was, do you guys know what I used to say back in like 2020? I'd be like, oh, I'm not getting out of bed for that. I think that's where is
that's what it is. Yeah. We don't. Yeah, I don't get out of bed for this percentage or that percentage.
Yeah, it was basically like we don't get out of bed for a 5% move in Bitcoin. Or it's basically like back when the gold bugs were celebrating like a 5% move, and I'm like, that's a Tuesday for Bitcoin. We're not getting out of bed for that. Yeah, no, I mean that was a long time ago. I'd almost forgotten about it, and then so there were a few. There was also, I don't know if you saw, there was these like little dissolvable things that would go in your drink. People would get a drink. Yeah, but there were these, and it said it was like Bitcoin dominance to 60%, that kind of stuff. Like that was dissolving in the drink.
No, that one, and my favorite was the little bottles of medicine, which said Bitcoin dominance prescribed by Mrs. Cohen. That was pretty good.
Yeah, no, it was good.
I hope people kept hold of this. Sounds like the sort of merch that will be worth a fortune on eBay one day. So I hope you kept hold of some of that.
Oh, I forgot to wear my T-shirt. What's a few trillion among friends? Damn it! Because I had like Ben was giving out free stuff, and I was like, free stuff finally. And
we gave out like 300 shirts or something. You got to represent, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, I saw there was so much stuff. Again, I saw so much stuff on Twitter just saying the ITC party was where it was at. Yeah. There was a lot. There was basically, apart from sort of general good vibes around the conference, it was some of the only sort of nice stuff on Twitter. Just how much people enjoyed Ben's party, becoming legendary.
I think it was a pretty fun party. And we had a lot of familiar faces there. Speaking of Tom Crown, he was there at the party.
Yeah, I met Tom. Yeah. That was good.
Yeah, so maybe let's get to at least a couple questions from the chat. I don't think we've got. Here's one that's kind of interesting. So RFK, someone says they unrealistic 4 million over 20 years. Do you guys think? Because I think some of them were talking about like accumulating essentially like 5% of the supply of Bitcoin. Is that realistic?
I mean, you can do it. I think the best thing to do, and I would implore the U.S. government to do this, is just buy it all right now. Buy it as much as you can and stop selling. I mean, for Pete's sakes, you had 210,000 Bitcoin, and for some reason, whatever reason that was, you decided to, actually move. And I don't know if they've actually sold per se. But I heard it was that. It was 550. Was it 550 per year they were going to purchase? No, it doesn't make any sense.
No.
550 per month or something like that.
I don't remember what I mean, would it have been, I don't know what schedule they actually laid out, but it would have to be more than 550 per month, because it would take a lot more than 20 years to get to 4 million.
I think 550 per day then.
Yeah. But I don't know. I don't know exactly what it was, but I guess the thought process, there's two things I thought about it. I'm like, well, if you're going to do it, why would you announce to the world you're doing it before you do it? Because it makes it even harder to get. yeah, I don't know if it's a little too optimistic or not, but we'll see.
I think I wonder whether after Germany selling, like last month, that did not go well for Germany. You know, they sold when it was 63 and it went down to 54, or they sold at 54 and then it went up. You know, so I wonder whether that has been noted in US government circles. It's like, and obviously Trump saying that, you know, because that was the meat of what Trump was saying about this so-called strategic reserve, wasn't he? He's just he wasn't, Trump himself wasn't saying we're going to buy Bitcoin. He just says we're not going to sell it.
Yeah.
And the US is in the and other countries as well are in the position of being able to acquire Bitcoin relatively easily because they just confiscate it from criminals. That's how the UK has 61,000 BTC, and all of it is confiscated from, I think, one criminal, one particular pair of criminals.
We just saw
and
Germany
did the same. Yeah. So I think there's that. And bear in mind, I think I've said this before, but 1st of January 2025, from that date, central banks will be able to hold crypto, Bitcoin, on their balance sheet as up to 2% of their reserves. They'll be able to hold in crypto. And I think that's something that's maybe not talked about enough. That could, you know, it's not just the US after all. The US is the one that can obviously print all the dollars it needs to buy all the Bitcoin at once, in theory. But I think there's going to be demand from other countries as well.
Yeah, I mean, there certainly could be. You would almost expect there to be a, you know, sort of take the path of like starting off with sort of some of the smaller countries and then working their way up, sort of proving it, and then working your way up to some of, like, you know, something like the United States.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I never, you know, Trump and RFK, you know, them announcing a strategic Bitcoin reserve is not something I imagine a lot of people had on their bingo card for 2024. You know, so definitely. Who knows? I mean, the market moves quicker than we think it can sometimes. I kind of think that, like, we overestimate Bitcoin in the short term, we underestimate it over the long term. It's kind of what seems to happen. Like back in March, it was like, you know, everyone was super, super bullish, and you know, now it's like, all right, well, it's been about 5 months. You know,
exactly. Yeah, what's the actual price today? I mean, talking about all this reserve as a reserve asset, where are we at? 64,000?
Yeah, 64.7.
64.
Yeah. So, it still does seem like 2019-esque to me, where you basically had about a 6-month bleed, and then we started to go back up, and then you had COVID, which kind of wrecked the whole thing. But before that, right before the pandemic, you basically just had sort of a 6-month bleed, and we're 5 months in, right? March to September would basically be the same thing, but we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see.
Couple more questions. What's your idea on Cosmos-based chains for this cycle? You guys got any opinions on that? I don't. But
what?
Cosmos, yeah, Cosmos and its ecosystem, the Cosmos ecosystem specifically, was absolutely ripping earlier this year, and now seems to be eating itself alive. There's a whole lot of flack flying in the Cosmos ecosystem. I think the Interchain Foundation is coming in for a lot of flack. There's trouble in paradise with that, and I think I just saw earlier that Kujira got hacked or something. Is, you know, so all is really not well in Cosmos. Which is a shame, because there are some really awesome projects in there, and you know, the Cosmos tech is generally pretty good. But the Acid, who asked this question, I think makes a really good point by bringing up Phantom. One of the reasons I think Solana and its ecosystem have been so successful is because Phantom is really good. It's so easy to use. They've done a great job of making a user-friendly product, and I think that has really helped Solana and all the other tokens there grow. And yeah, Kepler, I wouldn't say Kepler was necessarily clunky, but it's certainly no Phantom wallet at this stage. And I think that just shows the importance of usability, of creating a product that, you know, abstracting away as much of the complexity as you can. That is how that still counts, even in, you know, even when retail isn't here in force. You have to have products that are easy to use. You've got to remove as many of the barriers as possible. So I think Cosmos has definitely got some cool projects there, but at the moment it just seems a little. There seems to be a lot of strife there, and Solana just has so much momentum at the moment.
Is this the right price chart? I mean, I'm looking at it, and it looks like it's basically at its 2022 low. Is this right?
Yeah. That's the weird thing. Cosmos's ecosystem has been doing really well, and projects in there have pumped big time. Atom itself, you know, the native coin of the Cosmos blockchain, is having an absolute nightmare.
This is. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just, you know, there isn't enough demand to use Atom, because, you know, all of these Cosmos projects have their own native coins and tokens, and I think that's been a big problem for Atom and Cosmos. And then throw in a whole load of disagreement and infighting on top of that, and yeah, it's not great at the moment.
This is one of those things that, you know, we've talked about a lot, right, on this channel on NFA, and that's basically like a lot of these alts, right? You don't know which ones are going to survive from one cycle to another. And it's not a knock against Cosmos. I mean, Avalanche, Polkadot, Cardano, they're all basically doing the same thing. It just goes to show like why it's so much easier to stick with Bitcoin, you know, during tighter and tighter monetary policy and higher interest rates, right? Because this is what happens. You know, it's one of those things where guys, like, you know, it's not necessarily about the tech. It's just more about it's higher risk, right? It's higher risk, and you can have an ecosystem that's, you know, on paper theoretically okay, but that doesn't mean that it's, you know, going to outperform Bitcoin or anything like that. I mean, to give you an example, if you were to look at 1 over the Atom Bitcoin pair, back in January of 2022, just to put this on the screen here, back in January 2022, 1 Bitcoin would get you 963 Atom. Today, 1 Bitcoin gets you 11,000 Atom. Right? Like, this is what I keep talking about, and this is why, you know, this, I mean, and I know it's a joke, right? I know it's a joke, and I think for good reason, but like, this really is why Bitcoin dominance is important, right? Like, this is why, is because, you know, you look back and so many of those altcoins that were doing so well once upon a time have now fallen so far, right? And we can look at some like Solana. Solana's done amazingly well since the end of 2022, but it's also sort of survivorship bias, right? Like, at the end of 2022, Solana looked like it was probably going to be the one that wasn't going to do this, because it actually dropped more than the other ones, right? It was down 98%, and, you know, a lot of the other ones were down, say, like 93 or something. So again, like, it's really hard to know which one of those are going to do well, and that's why I just say, like, if you stick with Bitcoin, you know, you'll probably do a lot better. But with that said, last thing, I think the biggest chance for Cosmos to turn things around would be in 2025, right? That would be the time, and that would line up roughly with like lower interest rates, probably some quantitative easing coming in at some point. I'm going to guess it's not going to happen this year, but maybe next year. Rob, you look like you want to say something.
No. It was right. This is why me and Guy, like, I know Guy's portfolio because I'm a member of his website. I know that he puts more into Bitcoin just like me. Like, you know, we're all in the same boat. I have about 70% of my crypto assets into Bitcoin, and then Guy's got a pretty large amount. And it's the safest bet. I mean, maybe next year we're going to see some, you know, massive altcoin run, but I know everybody wants it. They're begging for it, but it just isn't going to happen for a while. And that's just pretty much how it is.
Yeah, I mean,
can you just share my screen, Ben?
Yeah.
Because I'm surprised you haven't mentioned it.
Look at that.
I saw that. I saw that and thought of you.
Yeah.
I mean, we're almost there. I mean, like 60%, if you think about it, it's not even really that far away, right? I mean, like we're at what, 56 now? So 56.2. Like, you know, 60%, I think we could probably hit within the next 5 months. And then I think that will be, I do believe that will be a sufficient amount of pain for the altcoin market after you go to 60. I almost wonder if it's sort of like converging, like it was 70, then like, you know, 40, and then maybe 60, and then maybe back down to 50 next year. I could see dominance going back down to 50 potentially, but not until sometime next year. And it could even be the end of next year. I don't know. We'll see. I think we should wrap it up because we were already past time. We have a ton of questions. We have a ton of questions coming in, but
yeah. I think it's time to wrap up because someone seems to think that at least one of us, Rob or me, is from Altcoin Daily. So
I think they think you from Altcoin Daily.
I presume it's me.
This is you.
Yeah. So maybe that's the moment we should wrap up. Did you see the Altcoin Daily boys in
I
Nashville?
did. They were at the party. Yeah. And actually, I saw them. I saw them basically every day at the conference. But yeah, and I just want to reiterate, like, you know, if you're, because this is how I get into trouble, is when I go on these Bitcoin dominance rants. Like, how I get into trouble is, like, you know, people are like, oh, okay, that makes sense, and then they sell their alt, and then that alt rallies like the next day or something. It's that sad, right? I mean, like, Atom is at its 2022 lows, right? I'm not trying to like dunk on it. I'm basically saying, like, this is a lesson, right? Like, this is what happens during the 3 years of the cycle where dominance go down, right? You find most of these alts just kind of bleed, you know, and then eventually they get another rally back up. I suspect any future rallies will probably be reserved mostly for 2025 for alt Bitcoin pairs. But again, I could be wrong. I have said before, if you're just now getting on the dominance train, might be kind of late at this point. I'm not even really sure if it's worth the tax hit you would take, honestly, even if dominance does go to 60. But again, those are the views. And like, these are things we've talked about for years on the channel. So, but we'll go ahead and wrap it up there. Next week, Rob's channel, right?
Yes, I believe it's my channel. I believe so. Yep.
Okay.
I'm not sure. There's a chance I might not be able to be here next week. Because I'm gonna have a friend in town. So we'll see. I'll let you guys know. But we'll wrap it up there. Thank you guys for tuning in. Again, subscribe to Guy and Rob. Links in the description below. And we will see you on Rob's channel next week. Bye.
Adios, everybody.
See you guys.